In today's video, I'm going to be looking at some of the best anti-meta decks that you can play right now in the standard format. The meta has shifted quite a bit since Destined Rivals, and we have a brand new BDIF. So spoiler alert, there's going to be a lot of fire on this list because playing a fire deck right now happens to be pretty good. But some of these decks do have a good matchup against some of the most common and popular decks in the tournament scenes right now. And if you're looking to go to Worlds and you want to play something a little under the radar, these decks definitely might be for you. If you're new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. The first deck I want to look at is Ethan's Typhlosion EX, which is, in my opinion, one of the best one-price decks you can play right now. This deck gets a big upgrade with this meta. Not only does it gain a new tool card with Brave Bengal that really does help fix some of your awkward matchups into Gardevoir, Grimmsnarl, and Dragapult, but it's also a fire deck, which happens to be really powerful right now versus the most common and popular deck in the format, Gholdengo. Gholdengo is on a hot streak right now and is one of the most played decks in the tournament. So having access to Typhlosion does give you a pretty easy win against Gholdengo. Like, this deck destroys Gholdengo, but also has a good matchup into stuff like Raging Bolt. And again, with the addition of the Brave Bengal, you're now able to put up more of a fight against some of these bigger Stage 2 Pokemon. It doesn't completely solve the matchup or anything, but Brave Bengal does make a big difference against Dragapult, against Grimmsnarl, against Gardevoir. It does give you a better time at trying to beat them. The Dracloak build does seem to be the most popular and best way to play it. The best performing build of Typhlosion right now is using Dracloak as a way to see extra cards, but this deck does flow really nicely, and also taking good matchups into popular decks like Raging Bolt and Gholdengo is not a bad thing. And with the Brave Bengal, you now have a decent fighting chance against some of the Stage 2 decks. It's definitely not a bad time to play Typhlosion, and this could be a pretty good deck for Worlds. Here's a deck that definitely took off during the Destined Rivals format, but I think has really slipped away since the release of Black Bolt White Flare. Honestly, I'm not sure why, and that's Eevee Box. I think Eevee Box is a very solid, underrated play right now. Maybe people are just kind of turned off of the deck because it's harder to pilot than most decks, but Eevee Box is truly a powerful archetype, mainly because it has some good matchups into Gholdengo, into Raging Bolt. Also, Leafeon gives you a really good time versus stuff like Grimmsnarl and Charizard, which are also fairly popular right now. The one thing Flareon doesn't really do well is it doesn't have a great time in a Gardevoir, and that's the one thing holding the deck back. It does have a bad Gardevoir matchup, or at least its Guardy matchup is a little shaky. Of course, you do have the Gravity Mountain, which can help, and I really do like the list from NEIC that we saw Nathan Ginsberg play. I think this is probably the best way to play Flareon, even in the new format. You could try to incorporate an Umbreon EX in your deck if you want to have a little bit of extra type coverage against Gardevoir. Maybe the Umbreon does make a difference in the Guardy matchup, but I think Flareon is a very powerful deck that if you can learn how to pilot and play correctly, and you know all the lines, you know when to use Sylveon, you know how to use Sylveon, I think this deck is actually really powerful right now and is a very underrated deck. This is a deck that myself, I've been thinking about bringing to any cups and challenges in the near future because not many people are really respecting or thinking about this deck right now for whatever reason, even though I think it's actually really good and can farm a lot of the big decks right now. This deck just gets you free wins. I'm talking about Crustle, Cornerstone Ogerpon. This is one of the most annoying decks you can possibly hit, because if you literally have no tech cards in the deck to handle the Crustles, well, you might as well scoop it up and go next. Now, this deck isn't perfect. Like the Flareon deck, I think this deck does have a very bad Gardevoir matchup, but it literally beats, like, everything else. Like, for example, you're going to destroy Gholdengo. This deck almost auto-wins Gholdengo. Even if they play a one of a Scizor, usually it's not enough to get over the hurdle of 3 Crustles, and, of course, the Cornerstone Ogerpon. You're just trying to be very tanky and annoying with your Crustles. You have Mist Energy, you have Luxurious Cape, you have Pokevital A for healing, and you have the Monkey Dory to make it even harder to deal with the Crustle. This deck has a great time into Gholdengo. Its worst matchup, like I said, is Gardevoir, but apart from that, I think it's a good deck because a lot of decks right now don't really respect Crustle, or even if they do have a tech card for Crustle, they're not really good enough tech cards to handle the onslaught of Crustle, and it's just a very powerful and annoying anti-meta deck that if your opponent isn't respecting, a lot of the time, you just win the game, and it's definitely one to consider when wanting to play in any tournament, because again, if you know your meta is not respecting the Crustle and the Cornerstone combo, well, you're going to get some free dubs, and if you're dodging Gardevoir, this deck definitely seems like a pretty good anti-meta deck to play right now. Ancient Box is surprisingly a very good deck right now. It might have just came back from the dead. I'm a big fan of this deck, and I actually just did a video on this deck not too long ago showing off how strong it actually is. I think this deck has a great matchup into stuff like Gholdengo. It's pretty good into Raging Bolt, and your Guardy matchup isn't too bad either. Using the Dunsparce engine to draw cards gives your deck a little bit of extra consistency because Ancient Box eventually did lose some pretty big cards with rotation like Pokestop and Radiant Greninja, which really does slow down the deck, but the Dunsparce does make up a little bit. It's not the same, and it's not as consistent as that engine was, but it does help a little bit more with this deck's inconsistency, because at the end of the day, while this deck is powerful, and while I do think on paper it does have good matchups versus some of the top decks right now, it is going to struggle a little bit with consistency, but you get over that hurdle, this deck actually seems pretty good. The addition of Brave Bangle does help the deck a lot, because now your Roaring Moon can hit even dangerous numbers really quickly. Of course, with the Gravity Mountain, Brave Bangle, you're going to have a little bit of an easier time against some of those big, scary Stage 2 Pokemon like Grimmsnarl and Dragapult and Charizard. But at the end of the day, you're going to beat a lot of other decks around it. Like, I think you're fine into stuff like Typhlosion. You're really good into the wall decks. Like, the wall decks can't really do anything against you unless they're playing like Noivern or something. And overall, this deck is a pretty strong one-price deck right now. And I don't think it's as good as Typhlosion, but I think it is still pretty solid and definitely not a bad deck right now that you should be trying out if you want to play a one-price deck to your locals. Fire just seems too good not to play right now, because Ceruledge actually looks like a deck that people should be looking into playing right now. Ceruledge is a very fast and powerful deck that just wants to discard a bunch of energy and do big damage. Also, being a fire deck means you have a great time in Goldengo. You also play Briar, which makes it really easy for you to win games against Goldengo, and Revavroom is a nice addition into the deck for draw. You can even try to add new cards like Air Balloon in the deck to give the deck a little bit more consistency at retreating your Revavroom. You do play the 4 Jet, but again, when the whole gimmick of the deck is discarding energy, you don't always get to use Jet energy, but Air Balloon definitely seems like a decent little addition into the Ceruledge deck. You might want to consider some way to maybe break through a wall like a Crustle, but overall this deck seems really good at the moment, as it does beat up on Goldengo. It's got a good Raging Bolt matchup. Its Guardian matchup was never too bad either. If you want to stick to playing the Jamming Towers in the deck, you might be fine into Gardevoir. And yeah, I think Ceruledge is really powerful. It's kind of underrated, and the fact that I haven't really seen much of it in the format is kind of bizarre. Like, I don't think it has a bad matchup into some of the big Stage 2 decks either, which is kind of crazy that that's the case, considering you'd think a deck like this would lose to stuff like Grimmsnarl and Charizard, but I think it has a fighting chance against those decks. I'm surprised it's not as popular as it could be. It's definitely not the same as Goldengo, but it does kind of remind me of Goldengo, where it's just trying to put a bunch of energy in the discard pile to do some big damage. I don't know, we'll have to see on this one, but I do like Ceruledge a lot, and it feels like a pretty underrated deck that more people should be looking at playing. While I do think that Grimmsnarl, Monkey Dory, Froslass is one of the best decks at the moment, I think that the normal Froslass Monkey Dory deck with no Grimmsnarls also not a bad deck right now. One of the things that makes it so good is it's better into Goldengo than the Grimmsnarl deck, mainly because you're playing a thicker line of Froslass, so you're always getting Froslass on the board, and you're able to devo the Goldengo deck a lot more efficiently, especially if they're not playing Monkey Dory or they're not playing the Picnic Basket. It seems pretty good into that deck. While the deck might take a worse matchup into something like Gardevoir, it's still really good in my opinion, because it plays Devo, and this deck I think gets to Devo better than even Grimmsnarl gets to Devo. Again, the heavier line of Froslass really does go a long way. There definitely could be ways you could build this deck. Maybe you could try to add Jellicent to the deck. You could even just play Frillish over Jellicent and maybe replace some of the Budoos for some Frillishes. You have the Maractus and the Blood Moon, so you still have other win conditions in other matchups, like against Raging Bolt. And again, just I think being able to abuse Devo is really good right now. You can even try out stuff like Enhanced Hammer in the deck if you want to have a better time at a Mist Energy Charizard, because again, you're really utilizing TM Devo like most decks really can't do right now. And I really do like this deck. I think it's fairly underrated, and definitely could be an annoying one to play against, because it's got a little bit more spread potential than Grimmsnarl does overall with the heavier Froslass count, and definitely could be a devious deck. Calling this deck an anti-meta deck does feel kind of weird, because I do think Ho Armarouge has a lot more potential than an anti-meta deck, but it actually is a pretty good anti-meta deck, because you have a lot of type coverage, you have a lot of power behind you in the early game with Wellspring in hands, and once again, you have a good Goldengo matchup. You're beating one of the best decks in the format right now, which is never a bad thing. And of course, just being able to abuse Iron Hands and Wellspring really quickly is quite scary. While the deck does have the power behind it, it does have a lot of consistency issues. It's not always getting turn 2 hands or Wellspring, mainly because the deck is a bit of a pile, so a lot of the time you have to get lucky with how well you draw, and the deck can tend to be slightly bricky, which does give the deck a little bit of issues. Of course, the Armarouge and the Ho-Oh is what you have to set up. Usually you have to focus on getting Armarouges on the board before the Ho-Oh, because Armarouge is the core of the deck to move your energy off. But again, the myriad of attackers you get to use is really cool. Like being able to use Durant, being able to use Hands, and Wellspring is really good. You have type coverage for days with the Durant helping against Grim and Charizard, the Iron Hands and the Wellspring being really good at just beating through your opponent. And then obviously having like Mew Clefairy combo is really good versus stuff like Dragapult. The idea of Monkey and Minior might seem kind of weird, but they actually do play a big role. Minior is really good against Maractus, and the Monkey Dory can help a lot against Dragapult and Grimmsnarl, especially the Dragapult matchup where you can use Clefairy Mew combo for sure. Yeah, this deck is really strong, and I've played a bit of it, and I am really liking the deck right now. It is a little inconsistent, but when it sets up, it works really well and can run over the opponent quite easily, and it's definitely not a bad anti-meta deck. This deck could be a legit deck after Worlds. We'll have to see. The last deck I wanted to mention was this crazy Ogerpon Box deck that got second place in a 1,500 player tournament recently. And this deck actually isn't bad right now. You have some good type coverage with the help of Clefairy. You have Cornerstone Ogerpon, which is really powerful against a lot of decks right now. And even just using Wellspring in general is also pretty good. And the Teal Mask, it doesn't hurt either when you're playing against Grimmsnarl and Charizard. It's a bit of an aggressive deck, and it plays a bit differently than Terapagos, because obviously there's no knock tiles in the deck or anything, so you're mostly just relying on the turboness of being able to Teal Dance and then use Ogre's Mask to swap in one of your Ogerpons. The deck is also a bit of a pile, like Ho Armarouge, but it does have some power behind it and can do some pretty crazy turn 1 plays with the help of Quad E-Switch and the Ogre's Mask, making turn 1 Torrential Pump actually a pretty real possibility. The deck is fairly powerful, fairly fast, and like I said, can be difficult to deal with when it has the triple Ogres, which can all be good in different scenarios. The double Cornerstone helps a lot against Goldengo. The Wellspring can be really good in the early game to cripple your opponent's setup, and the power behind having the Clefairy and the Teal Mask as attackers isn't too bad either. This deck, like I said, is fairly powerful and definitely one you should be trying out, because I think it is a fairly underrated deck and even did good at NEIC. I think the same person who got a good placement at NEIC also was the same person who got second place in this 1,500 player tournament. So clearly this deck is doing something right. Even in the old format, it was good, and now it's even better right now. So definitely got to try out the Ogerpon Box deck if you haven't already. But there you go, folks. Those are some of the best anti-meta decks you can play right now in the format if you want to beat up on the top decks in the meta, being Goldengo, Raging Bull, Gardevoir, and stuff like that. The meta's in an interesting spot. We'll have to see where it heads going into Worlds, and then, of course, I'm excited to see what happens after the World Championships. Maybe there'll be more decks we can talk about here after Worlds for sure. I'm definitely excited to see all that go down. If y'all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 25K subs here on the channel. What is your favorite anti-meta deck you're playing right now? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you on another video very soon. Bye-bye.